All right, Chair O'Donnell, we're ready whenever you are.
Okay, I don't see my own video, but I believe you can hear me, so I will open the Urban Commission Renewal Commission meeting of today's date, August 19th, and we'll let Mr. Conkle or whomever launch the agenda, and we'll discuss from there. I guess first I should take roll, and I don't have visibility on everybody, so I see Commissioner Smith, I'll count him in. I see Commissioner Rachel Lyles Smith. I see Commissioner Denise McGriff. I see the mayor. I see...
Sounds like Miss Nancy in the
Sean Cross is here.
Sean Cross, Mr. Conkle, and Mr. Parno, I believe. And is anyone else present that I do not have visibility on?
We do have folks in the audience. We have James Graham, John Lewis, and Dirk. And I can't pronounce your name, otherwise I would butcher it.
Legenhofer.
Yep.
Legenhofer.
Okay, consider that the roll call. Everybody was visible, and if Mr. Conkle wants to introduce the agenda, and we'll proceed from there.
Okay, thank you, Chair O'Donnell. Evening, Renewal Commissioners. At the last Urban Renewal Commission meeting, there was a request to bring up for discussion purposes and potential direction to staff. So it's a financial update on the Urban Renewal District, the funds that have been accumulated in there, as well as the status of the debt that is owed. And Mr. Parno is going to walk through providing an update and then facilitate a discussion on how the Urban Renewal Commission would like to move forward with either to pay down the debt, pay down a portion of the debt, not pay down any of the debt. I think there's multiple options here. We outlined 3 in the staff report, and there are probably others out there as well. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Wyatt, and he can go ahead and walk through this with the commission.
Thank you, Chair O'Donnell. Thank you, Commissioners, and thank you, City Manager Conkle.
Oops, sorry about that.
At a recent meeting, Commissioner Rocky Smith mentioned that I will be leaving the city in about a month. And I wanted to let you know what a pleasure it's been to serve you, and what a pleasure it's been to serve the community members, and what a pleasure it's been to work with the staff here at the City Hall. And I'm going to be moving into a new capacity where I get to continue to work with you and our partners at West Lynn and the city staff on the mission of providing quality drinking water at an affordable cost to our residents, and I'm super excited about it. As I've been kind of transitioning in my mind how to switch from a place that I've really cared about for about 8 years and move on to something different, I've been reflecting on some of the time that I've had here. And it started with a recruitment process about 8 years ago. And it was an extensive process where there was a headhunter, and they ran me through a list of questions 3 times on everything you can think of finance. There were 3 panel interviews, there was an executive interview, and there was a community meet and greet over at the High Cliff restaurant. And there was about 40 people at the community meet and greet. And I remember like halfway through, the HR director at the time came up and said, "Wyatt, you're going to give a 10-minute speech on what you think of Oregon City." And I hadn't prepared, and it freaked me out a little bit, but nonetheless, I love Oregon City, so I was able to do it, and things worked out. The other thing that happened was I was sitting at a table with about 6 to 8 community members. I think a couple commissioners were there. And one of them looked at me and said, "Wyatt, what do you think about urban renewal?" And immediately, everyone at the table and about 4 people behind turned and looked right at me. And I thought, "Wyatt, I think you should choose your words carefully." So even back then, urban renewal was a topic that was of great interest to folks, and even created some divided nature between folks. And I said something like this: I just worked for an agency, not as cool as Oregon City, but we did do a cool thing with urban renewal where there was a blighted area, and we went into partnerships with a bunch of nonprofits and the county and some other folks, and we built a community center where 8 nonprofits come together and they serve the underserved community members, and there's affordable housing up top, and it was a really cool thing, and I was glad to be a part of it. I happened to be involved because I was working on the finances of the urban renewal and so forth, and it was a really neat project. In addition to that, I said, regarding urban renewal in general, and everybody urban renewal in my mind, in my opinion, is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used positively or it can be used not as well. And it's a tool for economic development and making impacts in your community. You wouldn't use a hammer to saw through a log, but sometimes the saw works just fine. So in the 8 years that have ensued, I've continued to see time and time again that this is a hot topic. So I want to tell you how much I appreciate and admire you as a commission for looking into this and digging into it deep and trying to do the right thing with urban renewal, and also engaging the community. So I'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. So I wanted to break this presentation into two parts. I haven't had the chance to talk with you about finances for a little bit, and I thought the first part I could provide some general information that might be helpful to you as you're working through the process of determining what you want to do with urban renewal. And then, as Tony mentioned, the second part is the commission specifically asked for an update on the financial position of the urban renewal district, specifically the reserves and debt and options for how you could use the reserves. So moving to the first part with general information. Oh yeah, that's kind of tricky with the little bar. I think it's okay there though, the little bar. Okay, so first I want to provide some background, and I know that many of you are familiar with this information already, but I think it's useful to put kind of the context into a concise way, talking about what we're going to talk about. So urban renewal is governed by some specific documents, including the Oregon Constitution, Oregon Revised Statutes, Chapter 457, and in Oregon City, the Urban Renewal Plan of 2007, which was a plan amendment to existing plans, which we can talk about. The Oregon Constitution, specifically Article 9, Section 1C, it provides the authority for urban renewal for local municipalities. It establishes that cities can create a separate entity of an urban renewal jurisdiction, and then they can have the authority to create a tax of the overlapping districts, folks like the county and metro and so forth, so that they will all put in their funds to help support improvements that'll be made within the district. And we call that a tax increment, or tax increment funds, or TIF. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. As part of the public record tonight, and in the past, some questions have been raised in the community about the other thing that's mentioned in the Constitution, which is that urban renewal funds, or TIF funds, should be used to pay indebtedness. And I want to tell you a little story about that. When I came to Oregon City from the other jurisdiction that I was at, we'd had a process there where we called it was de jure bonding, which means same-day transaction financing. And we would do that where the urban renewal district would borrow funds from the city, the sponsor city, and repay them overnight. And we would call that washing the TIF funds to make sure it was being paid for indebtedness. When I came to Oregon City, we were not only doing transactions, and also in that city, we did transactions with banks, particularly on a large project, if that were to come up, and we needed more money than the city could put forward, okay? When I came to Oregon City, I noticed that we had some bonded transactions in existence, and we were also making some contract payments. So I thought to myself, we better double check on this. And I called a bond attorney that many of us in the circles are familiar with, that had been around a long time and handles most of the urban renewal transactions. And he said, Wyatt, there's been some language changes and so forth, and we interpret indebtedness. Now, these are the attorneys that opine on whether these debts are legally valid. We interpret indebtedness to have multiple meanings, broader meanings. It could be bonded indebtedness, meaning you go to a bank or investors and you say, we're gonna borrow your money. Or it can be contracted indebtedness, meaning if I do a service for you and I work for you, and then you owe me because I did the service, so now you're gonna pay off the contract. And in that interim, it's indebtedness, okay? So at the time I thought, okay, I mean, they must know what they're doing. I think that sounds good if the bond attorney tells me that. And then more recently, the issues come up, I think, a little bit more, a little warmer, if you will. So what I did about a few months ago is I called the bond attorney again and said, did I remember that right? And he's since retired, but his partner said the same thing he did. And then I contacted the financial advisor that works on most urban renewal transactions, who repeated that information. And then I called 5 or 6 cities, Portland, Lake Oswego, Wilsonville, Canby, North Bend, and Wood Village, and they all interpret the information that way. Meaning they sometimes pay contract indebtedness, sometimes they pay bonded indebtedness. That said, I will say that we can't unequivocally say that that's the perfect interpretation of the law, and that's just how the law works. Because as you know, there's very clear parts of the law, and there's some parts of the law that are a little bit more gray. And the clear parts of the law are established by voters or legislators. And then there's case law when something is litigated, which adds to that body of knowledge. But when something hasn't been litigated and it hasn't been made super clear in the laws, that's when there's some ambiguity. So I'll talk in a little while about going back to that option of de jure financing if you really, really, really wanted to play it safe. But nonetheless, that's my answer to that point. We always want to do what's legal and ethical. Hard to just ignore the bond counsel and want to pay extra fees to banks, though.
Mr. Parno, can I ask you a question real quick?
You sure can.
Chair O'Donnell, is that okay with you?
Certainly, please proceed, and I have a comment to make myself, so go ahead.
So to round out the comments and the point that you're trying to make, is there a contract for services between the Urban Renewal Agency and the City of Oregon City?
Yes, there is a contract for services. It's not a written contract. So if you and I agree, if I say I'm going to mow your lawn and you say, sure, I'll give you $10, we don't have a written contract, but we have a contract. So we have services. Now, that is a great question, though, because I think that's something that we've talked about in the past. Could we do a better job as part of working through this process? Could we more clearly define so you felt really comfortable with, yeah, I know exactly what the city's doing to perform services for the renewal? I think we could, yeah.
But that would better articulate the indebtedness of a contractual agreement for the Urban Renewal Agency.
Excellent point, Commissioner. Thank you. Chair?
I guess my comment is, and I appreciate what Mr. Parno is doing. He's actually conducting the same education that I hope when we conduct our formal education that we're paying a consultant for and for which Mr. Parno will participate. That is very good. And I know some of this may be a reaction to a couple of letters that I asked to be shared with the commission for their ongoing education in the future. But tonight, Mr. Parno should continue, but I also want to focus tonight's discussion. Tonight's discussion is very focused on, shall we move forward and pay off debt, or what would this commission's pleasure be? Having said that, I'll return it to Mr. Parno to give us whatever background he feels is necessary. Please proceed, sir.
Thank you so much, Chair. I appreciate that a lot. And so I will leave it at that. There was one other, I think there's one other question that I wanted to just touch base on, though, and that was the question of can TIF revenues be used for operations and maintenance? And the answer to that is absolutely not. It's illegal to do that, okay? Can TIF revenues be used to administer the district? Yes, because if you didn't have resources to administer the district, how would you conduct business? And that's to Commissioner Lyle Smith's point is we could probably do a better job of having an agreement in place that spells out all the terms of that. So that's a great idea.
Chair O'Donnell, may I ask a question?
Please proceed, Commissioner.
Mr. Parno, so I want to make sure I have this correct in my mind. So we talked both about contract indebtedness and bonded indebtedness, which I am familiar with both of those. You said the city does both, has done both, and is basically what the interest rates or the rate of return, the ROI on which one we decide to use. My experience has been mostly with bonded indebtedness, where the agency I worked for sold bonds. We then took the money, did the projects, and then when the project started making money, we repaid the debt. So it just went about it in a little bit different way.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner. That's an excellent point. And urban renewal, and then I'll move right into the topic at hand, right? But urban renewal is amazing in the sense that when you, as you know very well, when you originally freeze the tax base and start your district, the revenues that are coming in are trickling in. You can't do much with that. So it's very, very common that you'll need to go to a bank or somebody with finances to provide you money to do a project that's going to make a difference in the district. So very, very common to borrow funds with an urban district. Thank you for that comment. So that's the Constitution. And then the Constitution finally says the legislators in Oregon shall prescribe how urban renewal should be conducted. That's in the Constitution. And Oregon Revised Statute, Chapter 457, that's what the purpose of that is. It's specifically dedicated to urban renewal. It talks about how you form an urban renewal. It talks about generally how to conduct an urban renewal, how to close it down. It's not as detailed as you might like, but that's something that we can work through, I'm sure, with the consultants. And so on and so forth. And what I've noticed about the Chapter 457 is it really does provide a lot of leeway for the commission, the Urban Renewal Commission, to determine how they want to operate. It gives some general prescriptive information, and from there, there's a lot of room to do what you will. And then finally, the 2007 plan, it follows the prescriptions of Chapter 457, and it specifically lays out Oregon City's Urban Renewal Agency plan. It includes assessments of conditions in the district, a list of projects, very specific list contemplated back then in 2007. And really important, it establishes the maximum indebtedness for the district to carry out those projects. And that's a very important term, and that leads into what I want to talk about with you for financing. One more thing, I just want to talk about best practices and appreciate that Chair O'Donnell several months ago had researched and come across the Association of Oregon Redevelopment Agencies Best Practices Manual. He shared that with everybody, and that's been helpful to us as well.
Are we a member of that?
I am not aware of that. I mean, I don't know the answer to that. I don't believe we are.
We should be. We aren't.
Okay. Thank you. So I mentioned maximum indebtedness, and what I'm providing here is kind of a neutral, kind of the information that is available within the plan. To my right, hopefully your right, is the 2007 project list. It was a very specific list, including some of those players we all recognize, like the Rossman landfill, the Clackamas Cove, and so forth. And you can see that those projects all add up to $130.1 million, and that was established as the maximum indebtedness for the district. And if you were to ask me, how do you hold cities and so forth accountable, I would say the intention of the legislature was that the maximum indebtedness was a way to establish that there's not an unlimited access to funds. You need to tell us what projects you intend to do, and then you need to spend within the authority that you chose, and then you should close down, and hopefully that will benefit all the overlapping districts. The other thing that's in the Urban Renewal Plan of 2007 is language. There's a couple of important points of language that I'll note. One is that although it was an amendment plan, it specifically reset the maximum indebtedness. So, you know, I got here in 2012, this is before I got here. There were some things that happened up on the hilltop, and I just don't, it's even sometimes hard for me to get that historical information. But one of the things I can start with pretty well is to say that in 2007, the maximum indebtedness reset, starting with 130.1 million. It also includes language that says these projects are based on 2007 estimates. The commission at the time realized that it was going to take a while to accumulate tax increment funds to accomplish these projects, or even just the logistics of the projects. So it provides for an inflation adjustment. It says the maximum indebtedness will be 130.1 million, but it shall be adjusted for inflation over time. So I asked our expert financial analyst, Ryan Bradyhoff, who's working hard on the audit probably tonight at home. Hey, he's really good with doing inflation adjustments, and he pulled out the CPI for all urban consumers area west from 2007 to 2019, and we came up with the estimate that we think the maximum indebtedness would be adjusted to 165.7 million.
Mr. Parno?
Yes.
I just want to stop. Mr. O'Donnell, I saw that Mayor Holliday had his hand raised. Do you want to take that question now or wait till the end?
Let's take it right now because it's going to be an in-depth subject. So please, Mayor Holliday, ask your question.
Yeah, on this project list, I see a few things that have been done already. The Amtrak station, I assume, is complete.
Correct. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mayor.
And what about the Oregon City Shopping Center?
Well, that's a great question, Mayor, and I think that's beyond the scope of my understanding, and that's probably what will take place as you're talking with the consultants and moving forward. I appreciate your
All
question.
right, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So we talked about it. I'm sorry. Thank you, Chair. So, and then we put together the numbers of what's been spent to date toward the maximum indebtedness, spent on paying back debt proceeds and contracted indebtedness so that you're not going to exceed your maximum indebtedness. We know that interest on debt isn't included in that number, but principal certainly is. And then I wanted to state that these are estimates because we had been carrying the numbers, but I noticed that if you recall, as we were putting together the budget, we were being very thoughtful about not spending TIF while we were figuring things out. There is revenue that's coming in from leased property that we own. And so some of those numbers are included in there. So that number 22.3 might be a little bit high, and look forward to kind of tightening up those numbers with the consultants. So I thought that might be helpful in terms of where you're at in the cap to be responsible with the public dollars. Next thing I want to talk about is the revenue impacts of the district. So recall that I mentioned that the overlapping districts are contributing to the benefit of the district. And then conceptually over time, as projects are done and the urban renewal is closed, all of the benefits of the district will go back to those overlapping districts with increased values, assessed values, and so forth on the rolls. So they're all investing at the same time we are. The approximate current tax increment annually is $3 million per year. If you were to close the district at some point soon, the amount of revenue approximately that would come back to the Oregon City would be $800,000 a year. The remainder of the $3 million would go back to those overlapping districts, of which the county, Clackamas County, the fire district are the biggest beneficiaries of those, and a lot of other districts, and some to the state, which is shared with, which goes into the major pot, which is another discussion. But I want to show you a quick picture. If I were just to call a spade, urban renewal provides cash, okay? And I'm talking about finances. I defer to you on policy, and I admire what you're undertaking for that. You have a cash flow of $3 million that you can use to make projects and improvements in the purple area shown on the map here. And as we talked about, hopefully those darn well better be great projects that make a good impact on your community, and there should be a lot of vision in terms of making sure they're the right projects, and accountability, making sure that the funds are used properly, because these are tax dollars. And I know that this commission, I trust to do those things, of course. And we talked about the future value and how over time that return on investment would come back to communities. Alternatively.
Question for Mr. Parno.
Oh, yes, sir.
So regardless of whatever decision we make tonight to decide to pay off all the debt, part of the debt, whatever portion we're allowed to, we will continue to accumulate that value, that cash flow of $3 million per year, regardless of the decision we make tonight. Is that correct or incorrect?
That's correct, Chair.
Okay, thank you, sir. Please continue.
You're welcome. Did Commissioner Smith have a question, Chair?
Yeah.
I do see his hand up. Yes, Chair acknowledges Commissioner Smith.
It's a question about the map. In the close-up, it appears that South End Road, I've never noticed that. Is that accurate, that South End Road going up the hill is part of it?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Smith and Commissioners. Yeah, I worked with our GIS department to pull together the map for this presentation, and I thought that was kind of a neat little loop hanging down South End Road as well. I think maybe we could double, triple check that down the road, but there was some purple there.
Okay, I'm questioning that. I guess because the South End Road is a county road, right?
Oh yes, okay. We're still within the boundaries, but we'll double check.
Okay, thanks.
No, thank you, Commissioner. Okay, Chair, I'll proceed. So, alternatively, you could close down the district, and then you'd have $800,000 available for current services throughout the city as a whole. What you would forego is potential increases in the tax base that you could influence with the urban renewal district. And the last thing that, I think I just want to mention, we all are aware that going into this COVID situation, it makes things difficult to predict. But by no means is $3 million that you can focus into your community a small sum that you should take for granted. So with that, I will move into the second part of the presentation, which is on the reserves and debt. And I just want to provide a little bit of historical background here and just some interesting information that came to my attention. So in 2016, there was an initiative measure to basically restrict the use of the tax increment funds for only to pay down the existing debt and for the one project that was in place at the time. And since that time, the Urban Renewal Commission, out of respect to the voters and with precaution, said, let's not spend money on other things, although we did have to operate the district. But even back then, we held off that, and the general fund paid the Urban Renewal District's bills, which is fine. And then subsequent to that, there was a court decision that basically stated that the initiative measure was invalid because of the way, because basically urban renewal is a state function, and so by putting something in Oregon City's charter, that doesn't govern a separate state entity. And that discussion is taking place now in the Court of Appeals. An interesting thing about that measure that I wanted to share, because I really appreciate this commission, is, looking at the results of that, it was a really narrow vote. 51% said yes, close down the urban renewal district, if you will. 49% said no. So a friend of mine recently asked, because I've been bragging about my commission and saying, well, they're really respectful to the voters. They want to have a process to engage the community. And my friend said, well, you've got the 7,000 voters that wanted to do away with urban renewal. What are they doing for the 7,000 voters that wanted to keep urban renewal? Oh my gosh, what a challenge for you to think about. But I just wanted to share that. You got half the community does like urban renewal, in the sense if everything was provided information equally. So that's just some interesting information. Okay, moving on to the biennial budget. So then we put the budget together to, again, follow the commission's direction, and it was part of one of the commission goals that you would look at the urban renewal and do the right thing in the community and reach out and determine what you wanted to do. So we created the budget to follow the commission goal, which is to put the existing reserves and the accumulated tax increment into a reserve account until you tell us what to do with it. And I think that's perfectly fine to do. Well, then COVID-19 hit. At the time we put the budget together, and we had, I don't know, 4 million or so, 5 million in reserves building, and then we brought in additional taxes coming in, and rates on our investments were nearing 3% and going up, and so it made sense that we could hold on to the debt. Well, all of a sudden with COVID-19 and the economic impacts, the returns on our investments are really going down. And I'll talk about that in a minute. That leads into this discussion of reserves and debt that I appreciate the chair bringing up. I'm sorry, is there a question?
I see Commissioner Smith's hand up, and Chair acknowledges Commissioner Rocky Smith.
So my question is regarding, so the initiative, which basically said that we could pay down existing debt, that's the existing debt at the time that the initiative was approved. Is the existing debt the same now? We don't have any, do we have any debt that was now that we didn't have when that was voted in?
Thank you.
Meaning if we tonight decide to pay down the debt, are we really only paying down the debt that we had when the initiative was approved?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Smith. The answer to your question is yes, that is the same existing debt. The little detailed nuances are that we've made a couple debt payments since then, but we don't have any bonded indebtedness beyond what was in place at that time.
Okay.
Thank you. So here's a summary of the reserves and the debt. So on the left is the cash reserves, and you can see that we have approximately today, we have $6.4 million in reserves. Most of that we're maintaining in the state's local government investment pool, which is the state-run pool that invests on behalf of jurisdictions. That's about the highest return we can get because the state has a little bit more leeway than we do because we're very careful and protective of the assets. And a little bit's in the deposit funds. It's earning 1% interest, and the financial experts in the room would predict that that will go down. What I'm seeing in the city's case, there's a maximum on what you can keep in the pool. So the city has some additional investments on very safe debt securities. And what I'm seeing now is investments that we had at 3% are maturing. And as I look for other options to reinvest, we're at like 20 basis points, which is 0.2%. So that means, you know, and it's a crystal ball to figure out what's going to happen, but we can presume it's going to go on for a little while. So as the state's pool investments mature, that rate's likely to go down as well. On the other hand, we have the outstanding debt, and that consists of 3 series, 2008 and 2 2013 refinances, and the average rate of those is 4.8%. So I believe bankers are probably laughing and enjoying themselves and appreciated that they're earning such a high rate of return on that $6.2 million that we have. The interesting thing about the outstanding debt and why I think this merits a serious discussion is that it all comes due within 3 years. I mean, aside from the interest rates, it all comes due within 3 years. So leading into the next part of the discussion, what are the benefits of holding those reserves or paying the debt? Those 2 options. So I put together a summary, and there's a lot of numbers behind the scenes. I tried to simplify it as much as I could, and I know some of us had pasta for dinner, so I'll try to keep it kind of straightforward with the numbers, right? I'm going to just show you this, and then I'm going to show you a little bit of how we prepared the numbers, and then come right back to this, okay? I think what this is the benefits of whether to hold the reserves or pay the debt. So you can see that off to the left. The benefits are if you hold the reserves, you'll have more available cash in the short term, meaning for about 2 years, because it all becomes due in 3 years. The benefit of paying the debt off is obviously the interest savings. I didn't want to bore you with the details, but I'm just going to show you the next 2 slides is just a quick analysis of those. And if you look at how we put this together, we just said you have a beginning cash in reserves of the $6.4 million that we looked at. You've got the annual tax increment of $3 million coming in each year. And if you hold on to the reserves, you'll pay your debt principal and you'll pay your interest, basically, your carrying costs. Carrying costs is the difference between the cost of interest on the debt and the investment earnings. So I just subtracted those 2 to simplify things. And what you're left with is the available cash in each year. So if you hold on to your reserves, in year 1, you pay your debt, you have $8.3 million to spend. In year 2, you get more tax increment revenue, you pay your scheduled debt service payment, you have $10 million. And then in year 3, you got another $3 million that came in November with the taxes. You pay your remaining debt, including a big balloon payment at the end, and you have $8.6 million. If you pay the debt, you can see the differences right there in year 1 in debt principal. You immediately pay off your $6.2 million, and your carrying costs go from, I'm going to flip back real quick, $570,000 to $60,000, because you're not paying for interest that whole time. So going back to the summary, the difference between holding reserves and paying debt, the very bottom numbers are the amount of cash in addition to the annual increment that would come in that you'd have available to you. And in year 3, things round themselves out, and to pay off the debt, you end up having more cash available to you in the long run. So the obvious question is, do you have an immediate near-term project in the hopper that you might need to use those revenues for? And if I were to be an extreme example, I would say, pick a company, Intel or Nike, or somebody walks in the door and says, look, we will invest in your community and we'll create 500 jobs and we'll add $1 million a year to your tax rolls, so it'll pay you back in 8 years, and we'll put up affordable housing, and we'll make if you can just give us $8.3 million today. I mean,
Mr. Parno, sorry to interrupt you, but I see the mayor has a question. I want to allow it to be asked.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Mayor. Yes.
Yeah, Mr. Parno, is there any penalty for prepaying these?
That's an excellent question, Mayor. So currently, there is no prepayment penalty. There was for a long time that we carried the debt. There is one caveat, and I'm glad you brought that up, and that is that the largest bond series 2008 can only be prepaid on scheduled debt service payment dates, meaning that in order to pay that off, we have to wait until, if you direct me to do that, we would wait until December 1st to do that. Nonetheless, you know that I would try to negotiate and ask the bank to waive that fee, but they're bankers for a reason, and they know that they're earning $100,000 a year, or that'll be half of that, or $75,000 or something to hold on to that debt. So I'll talk about that in a minute. But yes, we can pay off the first two series Yes, we can pay off the 2013 series almost immediately, and the 2008 series we would pay off as soon as possible, or December 1st.
A very good explanation. Thank you, sir. Do I hear Commissioner McGriff?
I just asked him to say that one more time.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner McGriff. So if I were directed by the commission to move forward and pay off the debt, we'll talk about that at the end, we would pay off the series 2013 as soon as practicable. And then the series 2008, we would pay off December 1st of this year.
So Chair O'Donnell, you had
Yes, ma'am.
mentioned a balloon payment.
I didn't, Mr. Parno did.
Yes.
I appreciate his explanation, because in the end, it comes down to what we choose to do tonight in terms of paying this off, and I'm sure he'll elaborate on other sources of funds and the continuing income stream. So let me defer to Mr. Parno on the balloon payment.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner McGriff. So the balloon payment is sort of key in my mind. That makes the difference between having the cash for a short amount of time. Do you pay now, or do you pay in 2.5 years? So it kind of makes a valid discussion. So I think everyone kind of sees that, but we can come back if you needed to. So there are a couple of alternative approaches, and you know me, I was always trying to find solutions to give you options of what you can do. And so a couple of options in addition to just taking the $6 million and paying it off is one, we talked about this earlier, you could borrow from the city. So back to that example where Intel comes in and says, we're going to solve all your problems. If you needed immediate access to that cash, we could create a transaction where you temporarily, on a short-term basis, borrow from the city and pay it back. So I think that makes the risk of paying off the debt lower.
Parno, would you elaborate on the advantages and disadvantages of that from an interest perspective?
Yeah, from an interest perspective, and I'm gonna talk about it in two ways. One is, as you saw, if you pay off the debt today, you'll save over $500,000, about $510,000. And at any time, you could borrow from the city if somebody came in and you needed access to those funds. Another option, because I like to save the city money, but I hope this would make sense. I know some people make a lot of sense really easily, but you could direct me to create an interfund borrowing next time we talk, and we could send money from the city to the urban renewal to pay off the debt, and that would benefit both agencies, both of which are owned by the taxpayers. And the reason is this, because if you created a transaction where the city lent to the urban renewal money at 2%, the city would make more interest than it would on its existing investments. The urban renewal district would pay less interest than it would the bank. And there's some nuances to the fact that each agency has its own state pool and it's legal to invest in those. So as I said, I'm capped out with the city's funds. I think that might be a little bit complex, but at a minimum, I wanted to provide to you the idea that holding on to the reserves for available cash balances, you've got options if you needed to access cash. Did that answer your question, Chair? And there's a
Yes,
question.
I did.
There's a question from Commissioner Cross as well.
Let me acknowledge the mayor first because his hand has been up for a long period of time, and then I'll go to Commissioner Cross. Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, what is the maximum term that we can borrow between agencies, Wyatt?
Are you talking about in the term of years, Mayor?
Yes.
Yes. So I'm going to answer that question thoughtfully. When we talked about gray areas of the law, I interpret this as a transaction between two agencies. And so if there's a transaction between two agencies, there isn't a state requirement of how long to pay back that term, but it's more complicated than that. If it's a loan transaction between two funds within the same agency, there's a 10-year term on capital debt. There is also a nuance that I should mention in the charter, which says that the Urban Renewal Agency shall not borrow for a period longer than 365 days. And that would probably be subject to the same questions that are going around in court now. And there are ways to address that because at any time you could reborrow and relend. I'm not really concerned about that. And particularly, while I would be thoughtful about all of that and we would never do anything improper, what we're talking about is probably the need for a term of 1 to 2 years in this case. So thank you for letting me kind of talk that through. I think that's also something that you'd want to talk with the advisors when you're trying to figure out what kind of financing options are available to you.
The chair would comment that during that time, whatever we chose to do, we would have that continuing income stream of $3 million per year.
That is
So
correct.
please proceed. I don't know if anything else.
Thank you, Chair, and I think that, Commissioner Cross, yeah.
I'm sorry for a moment. I forgot. I need to acknowledge Commissioner Cross.
Okay, I just had a question for Wyatt, and that was for when does the TIF actually come in to the district? Do we get it throughout the year? Do we get most of it all at one point of the year? If you pay the debt in December and we get it all in say, the end of November, are we really without funds?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Cross. So the TIF revenue comes in with property taxes, the majority of it in November, and then there's other payments that come in. It's just like in your personal property taxes where you have the option to pay up front for a slight discount or pay in installments. The majority comes in November. So the first major installment is going to come in a few months. Thank you for that question.
Yeah, I was just saying, because I think 92% of it all comes in.
92% comes in November.
So you have $2.8 million immediately if we were to choose that.
Why does it dribble in then?
As I say, I think most people take advantage of the 3% off the
right.
top. So
Okay.
that all comes in November because
Right.
everyone has escrow accounts
Right.
after 2008. Not everyone,
Okay.
but it's more common.
A lot, yeah.
Yeah, forgot about that. Thank you.
If you have a 30-year mortgage on your house, you have probably have an escrow.
We move to their discussion, just trying to do a time check.
Absolutely, thank you.
Do you have anything further?
Yeah, so can I go back, Katie, to the
Yep.
presentation? We are about done. Thank you for all those questions. Where are we? So we talked about, talking to the banks, and we'll try to get a good, policy direction. So as included in the staff report, we had the options that were outlined in the staff report is to appropriate the reserves to pay off the debt. You could also appropriate the reserves for a potential project coming in if you wanted to get there quickly. I don't think that's really necessary. Or you could choose to take no action and hold on to the reserves. There were the other options that we talked about, like borrowing from the city and so forth. I will say that I'd have to come back to you. If you give me direction, I would come back to you for a budget adjustment at the meeting next month. A supplemental budget will be required under local budget law. And so that would just be a public hearing where then we say, we're going to take the money out of reserves and put it into one of these options. So with that, I am happy to entertain any other additional questions and would appreciate policy direction.
Well, at this point, the chair will entertain questions from his fellow commissioners. The mayor has had his hand up for a bit of time, so we'll acknowledge Mayor Holliday first.
Well, it seems to me this is a pretty simple equation to make. If we can save $500,000 by paying off this debt, and that's going to get paid off in 3 years anyway. So I'm going to make the motion that we direct Mr. Parno to use the reserves to pay off the debt.
Okay, is there any further discussion or commentary from the other commission members before we move on this motion? And we do have a motion on the floor. Okay,
Commissioner Cross has his hand up.
Commissioner Cross, sorry, thank you.
I don't know, because I'm new here, but if there's any projects or no projects, having $6 million in reserve and having money in the bank is a lot easier than trying to project out and try to figure out when you're going to be able to get around to have enough funds to get the funds to do a project. The other part of that is when you go to get more debt, there's not just the interest cost and that, it's the actual cost of issuing the debt, which is like 2 to 3%. And with a new district or with a smaller urban renewal district such as this, you'll probably gonna have to do a bank placement, which they'll only do like 10 years. And so I think there's a lot of costs and constraints that aren't really shown in this. If there's a project, if there's no project, then yeah, you could pay off the debt. Or do we wait to go through the process and then pay off the debt? There will still get maybe not $510,000 worth of savings. Maybe it's only $450,000 worth of savings. But would it be better to hold on to the reserves until we figure out if you're going to, we want to close down the district or keep the district open? Do we want to have the ability to go do projects? I mean, I think that's the real question here. It's not one or the other. That was over a 3-year process. I mean, we could, do it. We can go anywhere in between that and still pay off those bonds in December or June of any year between now and when the balloon payments due. But I guess my only question, or comment really comes down to, are there any projects, and would this really hinder us in the ability to do a project if it did come in a year? That's all I have.
Mr. O'Donnell, can I respond to that?
Please do, Mayor, and then I'll talk after you.
Well, I'll just talk about the politics of the situation right now, and that is that it's clear that the urban renewal agency isn't going to do any projects until we go through this process and, have a long community discussion. So, I'm not terribly worried about having the money to do a project in this 3-year period.
Okay, the chair will give his opinion of this. I feel it's almost a basic household management problem. I mean, our savings are earning close to zero interest. Our interest expense continues to erode are essentially what I classify as savings. We're paying interest, and to Mr. Cross's comment, and to agree with the mayor, we have no active projects, nor do we have any in the foreseeable immediate future. One of the criticisms of urban renewal is it should be project-based. Yes, we have potential projects, but again, if we chose to pay this off, it's a $500,000 savings, and in the absence of a project, the fund could be depleted, as I said before. Plus, we do have the option, as Mr. Parno said, to borrow money internally, which is smart business. Why not pay ourselves rather than pay a higher rate to an outside banking industry? Meantime, even if we choose to pay this off, we would continue to accumulate funds in cash at that $3 million rate per year, or some net amount of that. To me, it's basic household management. If I owed $10,000 on my car at 4% and had money earning nothing, I'd pay it off if I could. But I'll throw the question out, and if anyone has any other comments, I'll accept them. Other than that, I will move that I see Commissioner McGriff's hand up.
Thank you, Chair O'Donnell. I guess Commissioner Cross raises a very interesting question, and I guess part of my question has to do with, does it really matter whether we do it now or we wait a little later? I'm really interested in us going through the process that we talked about doing and making a determination about what we're going to do with it. I do understand the idea that Commissioner O'Donnell is stating about, if I owe $10,000 on my car and it's not getting I'm not paying any interest, should I pay it off? Pay it off now or later? I'm not so sure that I can see this paying part of the debt off, but then there's the one piece that causes me concern about, what is the thing, penalty for early withdrawal or penalty for early payment? So I just have a lot of questions about it.
I think I'd like to respond to that. The forthcoming educational experience that we in the community are going to have is more dedicated to the larger issues of the district, changing the boundaries, potentially closing the district, moving forward with the projects. I think tonight's a very focused decision on, do we pay off this debt? And I acknowledge Commissioner McGriff's statement, but I need to see, is there anyone else that chooses to speak? I see Commissioner Rachel Lyle Smith.
Thank you, Chair. So, Mr. Parno, hypothetical scenario. If we pay off the debt in December, we pay all of it off. Around December, we will also receive $3 million in revenue. And then, say a year from now, or the following year, we'll get another $3 million in revenue. So we'll be back to having $6 million in revenue. So I guess what it feels like, we could pay it off now in a year and maybe a year and a half. We'll be back to having $6 million in revenue that we didn't really lose. I mean, like, we could use that to pay off the debt, and we kind of are back to where we were. Is it that simple?
Chair O'Donnell and Commissioner, I think it's pretty close to that simple.
Roughly.
Roughly. Roughly, and I should comment as well. I really appreciate Commissioner Cross. I'm going to just use this as an opportunity to do two more quick plugs. One is, of course, City Manager Conkle and Economic Development Director Graham and we have conversations, and in terms of, projects that are ready to come in right away, kind of talk through, and there's always the possibility. I don't want to rule that out, but there's been some talk, but nothing immediate. The other thing that I wanted to mention was thinking about urban renewal in general. I remember it might have been Tony as the community development director, one of his staff that organized at some point where we toured over in Lake Oswego their urban renewal agency projects, as well as Wilsonville. And it was a really informative process in terms of what Wilsonville did with advisory votes and the things that they've accomplished. And so I think about what you're undertaking and would just say you've got a good resource over here in Commissioner Cross, and you've got some opportunities to do some looking. And finally, I appreciate the leadership that Economic Development Director Graham brings in, along with Tony and yourselves, in that it's important to know and have vision for what you want to accomplish in the district. And I understand that's the goal before you implement the district. So it's that classic saying of, if you have a map to where you're going, you're more likely to get there. And so I feel like there's some thoughtfulness into figuring out that vision. And Mr. Graham has talked to me about that several times. I appreciate he's coming in to do some of that. So that was long-winded, but thanks for that.
Yeah, if I can follow up real quickly, I guess where I was going with that is similar to what Commissioner McGriff was saying. We have a project right now which is going to tell us a lot. By next March is when it's supposed to be wrapping up. We'll have some decision to make on, and some feedback from the community as to the future of urban renewal. We know we're not going to do I'm pretty confident we're not doing any projects anytime between now and next March, likely next a year from now. So I just kind of feel like, even if it's next March, I don't see a lot of things, a potential of the potential is always there, but if it's 6 or 8 months past when we complete that project, we'll kind of reset and kind of already be back to having $6 million in revenue and roughly. You know what I mean? Like I just have a hard time seeing anything monumental happening. It could. Yeah. You never know. I think there's speculation about the Rossman site. There's something that could potentially come back with the Cove. So I think there's some potential projects out there that could come in. I do like that we have backup options. And in this case, a year and a half is not that long.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Sir, Mayor, point of order?
Yes, we have a motion on the floor, but
No second.
it does not have a second yet.
That's right.
Commissioner McGriff?
Yes, I was wondering if I could ask our Economic Development Manager if he has any comments about this, since he is here today and listening to this conversation. That's not putting him on the spot. Not asking for advice, just wanting, since you've been discussing this with them and you're part of the triad that is going to manage this whole project.
You can, yeah. Or the mic, one of the microphones.
All right.
Well, I was prepared for this possible scenario. But good evening. We've talked a great deal about this, and I've always used the phrase, stay away from a situation where the tail is wagging the dog. That means if you're going to support urban renewal, don't necessarily support it because there's a project in front of you. Support it because there's a vision in front of you. And that's what the entire economic development strategy that we're also about to embark upon is all about. Developing objectives and strategies for the city so that anything that you invest in speaks to your plans in economic development. So it's important to have a vision. And while there are projects out there, I know of projects swimming around, but I think it's important that we resist the temptation of letting projects dictate your actions. It's important to have a vision.
I appreciate that. I'm going
to respond to that.
I'm in lockstep.
Chairs like to respond to Mr. Graham, who I generally agree with. But you know what? We cannot deal in rumors, and we cannot deal in what might happen or could happen. And one of the major criticisms of the urban renewal is the lack of it being project-based. And quite honestly, you use the term vision, there is no focused vision. There's a wandering vision, but nothing focused. So quite honestly, I don't know if I'm allowed to second the motion as a chair, but I'd like to see a second to the motion.
You are.
Well, then I'll second the motion if there's no further discussion, I'll second it for purposes of a vote and the vote, does the mayor's motion need to be restated for clarity?
I'm just curious about the timing.
As Commissioner Rachel Lau-Smith said, we still have a revenue stream accumulating. We have no active projects and none in the immediate forthcoming future. I would base my decision on that information. Any further comment from any members of the commission?
Yes, I'd like to ask Mr. Perno about the timing.
What is your specific question? I thought the timing had been explained. So
yes, I just would reiterate it one more time, the timing of repayment.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioners. So what would occur next if it were decided to appropriate the funds to pay off the debt is I would come in the subsequent meetings next month or so. We would have a public hearing to adjust the budget. That's required under budget law. And then if that were approved and I was provided direction, I would pay off the 2013 series as soon as possible. And the 2008 series would be December 1st of this year.
Thank you for just reiterating that again for the members of the audience who are trying to track on this.
Pleasure.
At this point, we have a motion on the floor. I see no further comment. Katie, would you like to restate the motion, or if the mayor would like to, he can?
The motion is just to authorize the finance director to pay off the debt at his best discretion.
Seconded by Chair. Call for the vote.
Commissioner Sean Cross,
Yes.
Commissioner Rachel Lau-Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff,
Aye.
Commissioner Dan Holliday,
Aye.
and Chair Frank O'Donnell.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Do we have any further business in tonight's meeting? Being none, I'll declare the meeting adjourned. Give us a few-minute break, maybe 5 minutes.
No, let's take 10 minutes because it's going to take Katie a while to get everything switched over.
10 minutes it is. We'll reconvene at approximately 7:15.